Hey everybody, this is Terry Kerr, Executive Coach and Empowerment Strategist with the Unstuck Duck Coaching. Welcome to my podcast where I show the stories of extraordinary survivors who have made the conscious choice to pivot and thrive. Today I have with me Lana Jelenjev. How'd I do? Good?
Yes, did it very well.
Yes. So Lana is from the Philippines and she's currently in the Netherlands. And she's also a breast cancer survivor just like me. We met online through a program that I took and she took called Playing Big for women who want to speak up, create, and lead. And in getting to know each other a little bit online, we found we had similar stories. So I'm delighted to get to know you a bit better today. So welcome, Lana.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for creating this platform for women to share their stories.
Yeah, this is so much fun. I've had a couple interviews already that are they were really great. And even with people that I thought I knew really well, it's amazing what comes out. It's pretty cool. So to get started, tell me a little bit about yourself. So you're from the Philippines and you're living in Holland. So
Yes.
tell me a little bit about you and where you grew up and where you live now and why are you there versus there?
I would consider myself as a love bat.
Okay.
So I moved in the Netherlands 13 years ago now because of my husband. um that's one of the pivotal moments in my life, moving from although I was out of the country already at that time, but yeah, moving to a place where I barely knew anyone except for my husband.
Mhm.
No friends, no family, no career, so that was a big move. um and yeah, I've been here for 13 years now this year, enjoying my life with our two beautiful kids and our French bulldog,
Mhm.
and of course my Dutch husband, Dutch by nationality, but more of the Serbian Russian by what's this by culture.
Okay. Nice. And so you've been in Holland for about 13 years.
Yes.
Do you miss the
Uh,
Philippines?
Miss, not really. No. Not in a sense that I would have thought, missing a place. I do miss mostly the people, the warmth.
Mhm.
Uh, Sometimes during this period, winter period, I find myself really like hibernating.
Yeah.
I'm just missing the sun. I'm just missing the warmth. And yeah, the culture is very much different. So we're very extended culture, very much focused on being with others. And I'm in a country which is almost the opposite. So that's a big change and big shift in how I've experienced the different learning environments. But yeah, I wouldn't say I really miss it. What I do crave for is more of the having the tribe around you.
Yeah. And now that, the online communities can be so much more extensive, it's not as alienating anymore, I don't think. Would you agree?
Oh, definitely. How we met, you've shared your story, and I was also diagnosed at a very young age. So I was diagnosed when I was 37,
Mm-hmm.
and at that time, yeah, I was already here. Our kids were 5 and 7, and it was really a period where I'm like, oh, how do I, what do I do? Where do I find the support? And the online community has been that space for me because, yeah, when you're on your own at home, or you're recovering and you don't want to really go out, the being that, um I don't know if you've experienced it while you were in treatment, very reclusive and very selective
Yeah.
in who you interact with. So for me, having that online space has created such a wealth of friendships as well.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just imagine that, we're having this conversation because we met in an online space.
Yeah, I know. So tell me a bit more about your cancer story. So you were 37. I was 41. So it's not super different, but yeah. So 37. How long ago? How long ago was that?
It's this year now, sixth year.
6 years. Okay. So tell me, how did
Yeah.
that whole thing come about?
Whew. I I would say the biggest part of it is biggest part of that story is my mom. My mom passed away from breast cancer at the age of 49. So for me, I have been very what's this diligent when it comes to my self screening, and that's when I found out, that I was like, oh, there's something there. It's unusual. Took me a few days before I mentioned it to my husband, and it just went from there. I'm so lucky that I'm in a country where the healthcare system is so efficient in that sense of, yeah, going from mammogram to ultrasound to biopsy. Everything was done within a day. And you didn't have to wait for months to get those those checks. So it happened. It seemed like a blur, because it was just like, oh, there was this. Went to the house doctor gave me a recommendation to go to the hospital did all this test, and 2 weeks after, you're being told by a surgeon that, hey, yeah, they found out that it's breast cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
Did you end up having a double mastectomy or a
no, I what's this? It was a lumpectomy,
lumpectomy? Yeah.
and I took also a genetic test and found out that it wasn't genetic.
Oh, that's good.
So that was also one of the reasons why, because we were like, what's the recommendation in terms of the surgery and everything, and it all hinged on the genetic test.
Yeah.
So since they saw that it wasn't genetic, and the recommendation was to get a lumpectomy, it was so early stage.
Mm-hmm.
Um, However, it was also a bit aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
So I did, in essence, adjunct therapy of chemo, radiation, and what's this, immune therapy as well.
Herceptin?
Yes.
Me too. Me too. Yep, I do the same. You would be triple positive then, is what we say in the breast cancer world.
Yes.
Yep, me too. Okay, good.
And then I have the medications for the next 9 years. So 3 more years of daily tamoxifen.
Yep. I actually didn't do well, I did it for 6 months, and it was just, I didn't tolerate it. So I got my ovaries out instead. And
Oh,
that was my
option.
Well, I was triple positive. So I had chemo, radiation, Herceptin, the whole thing. And then, but I was multifocal. So my first lump was only 8 millimeters. But then when I had an MRI, they found 5 more. So
Oh,
we're
okay.
like, when we're done everything, we're just going to take them.
Stick it.
I had the double mastectomy at the end of my treatment. And by the time I got to the point where I wasn't tolerating tamoxifen, I was like, I am done. I don't want to do this anymore. And so I had, I had the reconstruction where they took my stomach and built my breasts out of my stomach.
I have a very funny story while being told about that. I was like, okay, how does that happen? And they were like, yeah, saying that either you get it from the tummy or from your buttocks. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna get a tummy tuck.
Yeah.
That was, yeah.
Yeah.
And the surgeon was actually laughing at my logic. But I was just, yeah,
Yeah.
making the most out of the situation.
Well, yeah, and I did. I mean, I got a tummy tuck, but I also got an infection in it.
Oh gosh.
Awesome. And it is what it is. And now that I'm, my scars don't hurt anymore as much. They did though for quite a while, but I'm alive and I have it, all taken care of. So when I went and chose to get my ovaries out instead of doing the tamoxifen, they're like, well, we should look at other. I'm like, I'm not doing anything else. I am done. You've taken everything you can And I'm okay with that. That was
Mm.
my, I'm done.
Yeah.
So yeah, I applaud you though for sticking with the tamoxifen for 10 years. That's a lot.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I don't really have any side effects, I would say. Of course, the main thing is it has put me in menopause. So
Yeah.
I've been in early menopause since I was what, 39. So which is at that time when they ask, the first thing that the oncologist asked us was, are you done with your family?
Hmm.
Yeah, and it didn't really dawn on me. I was like, why ask that question of, are we done? Then she said, oh yeah, you have options of freezing your egg if if you want to still have children. And at that point we were like, no, we have a boy and a girl.
Yeah.
That's it, and just the idea of going through it after everything, I was like, no.
Yeah.
But it wasn't given as an option, the taking out the ovaries, and since I wasn't reacting to the tamoxifen, so we were like, okay.
Yeah, I
uh,
think they prefer you to do the tamoxifen than my route. But I was at the I had the depression, anxiety, and rage, the
oh
trifecta,
gosh.
and
Oh
it was not ideal for me. I didn't want to live that way.
yeah.
I wish that I had been one there. I mean, I can't remember the stats. I've read them, but there's a small portion of women that just can't tolerate it at all, and I was one of
Yeah.
them. So,
Mhm.
but those people that it's just like taking a vitamin, right? Like it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, a vitamin that you can also forget.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so let me tell me a little bit about who you were before you got sick. Like, what did you do for a living? What were you doing then?
Yeah, I would say there has been quite a lot of changes. So before I got sick, my focus was really on the field of education. So I was providing workshops for parents. I still do curriculum design work. But yeah, my field was really immersed in the education field. And then I got sick and had to really evaluate what is it that I wanted to do. And I remember that night, I was just crying and telling my husband, that my biggest fear was I don't want my kids to not remember me, because basically that's how I've experienced my mom. She passed away when she was 49, and she has been sick for years before she passed away. So it became more like a reverse role of the child, being the caregiver. And I was just in my my early teens at that time. So for me, it was a big question of, oh, I don't want my kids to not know me.
Hmm.
And my husband was just like, and how would you want them to know you? And I was just like, I don't know, I don't know. And I kept crying, and I was like, I don't know.
Goosebumps. Goosebumps. Yeah.
And that's when I realized that was what is being asked from me. That I have this opportunity, for me to explore that question. And I did quite a lot of self-help before, because I've been in the field of child development and psychology. So it's not something that I'm not used to. It's a different level though, because there's a level of existentialism that's attached to it, of, yeah, how do you think of your own legacy in situations like this. And that's when I realized that, for me, the answer was not to leave a legacy, but to live my legacy. And that was then that question, how do you go living life that you would say you're proud to go by. And so I started small steps. One of the smallest steps is to really reconsider, who do I hang out with, who do I connect with.
Hmm.
um I've seen some friendships fall, mainly because they couldn't understand my choices. because I was firm also with keeping my boundaries. It was like it became like a very ferocious bear, saying, "Oh no, this is not for me," or "I'm not going to go. I'm not going to this event because I need to manage my energy." So they kept on hearing that, which they're not used to before. And it's the same with my family, especially also with my husband. He started seeing me putting certain boundaries in things, and that was one of the biggest shift, I guess. It's a small step in terms of evaluating people who do I want to connect with. And then I was reminded, of Jim Rohn's words about we are the average of the 5 people that we spend our days with. And I was like, who am I spending those days? And how are they putting me in that as well? So it became it. I would say, a lot of people say it's selfish. My term for it's self-full. Putting myself in the equation was something that I didn't practice.
Yeah.
um and that was that big realization of, yeah, how do I put myself in.
Love
It, it
it.
even it even went to a very simple act of checking in with myself. I realized that there was one day where I've just had my chemo, and my husband, normally they would allow him to work from home, but at that time he just had to go. I was getting irritated because he's not messaging me to ask how I'm doing. And I just had this light bulb moment of, why am I even asking for my husband to ask me how I'm doing? Why can I not do it for myself? So what I did was I've put an alarm on my phone every 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and 6 o'clock. And that alarm is just a question of, how are you, Lana? And
Beautiful.
that became a check-in period for myself of, oh, wait a minute. I don't need to have my husband asking me this, because I can do this for myself. And at the same time, it gave me that space to really check in with myself of, how are you? I don't know if you've experienced it, that during this period, being asked the question of how are you was the most difficult question to answer, especially when you're being asked, 20 to 50
Yeah.
times in a day.
I love this one. How are you? Let me just hang my head and the tilt. And it's
Yeah,
like, ugh. Yes.
yes. And then there's that, because for me, it went to a point where I said, okay, let's see how people would react if I say, how, when they ask how are you, and I just replied, up to where do you want to know? And then
Yeah.
they're like, oh, you're faced with, oh, yeah. And then I would say, when you want to know how physically I'm doing, how emotionally I'm doing,
Yeah.
how much time do you have in exploring this question with
Yeah.
me?
And how much are you really invested in asking that question?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
honestly, I found that I got to the point where I just knew that I would just say, you know what, I'm doing good. Today's a good day. And if it wasn't a good day, it was simply a good day because I didn't want to talk about it anymore. That was
Mm,
a thing for me. I really needed to set the boundary of how much I told my story.
yeah.
Because every time I told my story or I talk about my ailments, physically, or my emotions being so scattered or messed up, it would just pull me down farther every time. So there was only a few people that I actually would allow into those spaces because I knew they would honor that. And
Mm,
um, I remember very clearly being on my couch with my friend Kathleen, and I was just like, I just don't want to talk about it anymore. Like, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to be the sick friend anymore. I just want to be me. And I want to be able to be, if it turns out that that's what I want to talk about, then great. Right. But I
yeah.
wouldn't expect any different from anybody else either. Like
Yeah.
those setting that boundaries, I think it was so key to my own mental health
Yeah.
boundaries.
Yeah. I started, at that time I was like, okay, you know what? It's so challenging to have friends and family from the Philippines asking you how you're doing 24/7. And I was just like, okay, I'll be public. I've posted, I've post updates in my feed. They can comment on that, if it's a video, if it's whatever reflections I have. So I just made it more like, oh, what? This is the best way that you would know what's going on with me. Just read that, you know, just read that post, and then that's it. Then you know what's going on. But I do hear you. At one point, it was really a question of, you know who are those people that I can go to because they are able to hold that space for me.
Hmm. Well, and also what was also I found a really funny little mind bender for me was, like you to comment about how texting hoping your husband's going to ask you how you were doing, and then everybody's asking you how you're doing, but then there were certain people that never asked how you're doing, and then you feel the gap, right? You're like, why aren't they asking how I'm feeling? Like, these are supposed to be my people, like. And but people don't have, not everybody has the same capacity for it, and they
Yeah.
don't have the capacity for grief or awkwardness or you know, anything. And some people are busy, and that's okay. Um, it was a great sociological experiment for me to look
Yeah.
around and see how people have dealt with having a sick friend.
Oh, definitely.
And I was a really bad sick friend. Like I wouldn't accept help. I was like, no. And I was, I'm feeling like I need to lash out today. And you're the lucky winner. And some days I would just disappear because I didn't want to be sick. I didn't
Mm,
want to be that person.
mm.
So, and I
It's
didn't have any
interesting.
control over it.
It's interesting how you shared about, people who are not responding. And it took me some time to realize that, because at that time I got introduced to nonviolent communication. So I don't know if you're from. Oh, yes, Marshall.
Yes.
So I decided to get trained under what's this, in NVC.
Yeah.
And for me, that was life changing. That to be able to hear the no behind the yes behind the no
Mm.
was a big thing for me, because it made me realize that in the same way that I say no to other people, there is something in their nose. Like for a friend of mine, she was very, very frank in saying, I'm sorry, but I couldn't handle seeing you like this. And she remains up until now to be one of my closest friends, much like a sister to me. But at that time, she just knew where she stands, when it comes to dealing with that. And she just couldn't. And to be honest, I was so happy to hear that, because then I knew how to set expectations around our relationship, our friendship. And for me, that was even more important, just to
It's so
have that.
powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also knowing, like, when I was disappointed in somebody else's actions or lack thereof, being able to analyze in my own heart what it was that was going on, instead of saying, wow, like I have to forgive this person, but they haven't really done me a wrong. But I had that, like, I could
Yeah.
be angry with them. I could be like, hold it against them, or I could, forgive them for basically being human. Like,
Well, and this is why I said, being at that space really shifted a lot, because it really made me consider as well, my own feelings, my own needs. It's like needs. People are like, oh, they're allergic to the word needs, but it was fascinating for me to know, it's like, okay, what's the layer behind my anger? What's the layer behind my frustration?
yeah,
And as I keep on peeling those layers, I'm like, oh, so this is what's that, what's this is the story behind it. I remember uh one of the most challenging questions that I got was with my 7-year-old daughter. We were just sitting on the sofa, and she said to me, just out of the blue, "Mama, well, I have it too." And I was just like, what do you say to a 7-year-old child? And I was like, oh, if I think about the old me, how my old me would have responded was, it's okay, baby. Just brushing it off and, giving assurances and not really connecting with what was the need behind that question. And the new me, and I was actually surprised by myself. It was like, oh wow, this is different stuff. This is when I started telling her about saying, I don't know. What I do know is technology is getting better. Medicine is getting better. Every year they're finding ways of treating cancer. Who knows if cancer would still be there? But we don't know.
Yeah.
And I was just sitting there with her, holding her hand and telling her that what I also do know is as much as we're here, we'd always be here for you, for your brother.
Yeah.
And that was that. I was like, oh wow, those moments where I'm like, oh, that the old me would have gotten into that very, culturally appropriate response of, oh, we don't talk about it like that, let's not even think about this.
Yeah.
In the Philippines, they would even be making the sign of the cross. But yeah, it is, there's quite a lot of growth that I
What
would
a
say
gift you can
happened.
give to her, though. Like, what a gift you just gave her. That's brilliant. And it'll be a continued conversation, I'm sure.
Oh,
Like,
yes.
as she gets older, how old is she now?
She's now 12.
12. So as she gets older and, her things start to develop and she gets closer to adulthood and starts to ask more evolved questions, understanding that you have that layer and that foundation that you've set. Like I wish, when I look back at when I was in treatment, I mean, I railed against the world. I was so angry. And it's, for me, I had a significant shift once I was done and I went back to work and I can't do this anymore.
Mm,
And I had to have that holy shit moment, for lack of a better word. And I didn't have the emotional intelligence or the even the reflective nature while I was in the depths of it, and I wonder if I were to go back, if I had those skills, how it would have been different.
mm.
But I do know that now, I mean, I love post-cancer me way better than pre-cancer me.
Yes.
Way
Definitely.
better.
Definitely. There was a conversation between one of my friends. They were visiting, and that was definitely after treatment already. And she was asking my daughter about, so what is it that you like about yourself? And at that time, I think she was 10. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, around 10. And she started saying, oh, I'm creative. I'm capable of doing this and that. So she started saying a lot of positive things about herself, and then added the words, just like my mom. And I was like, okay, now I know. You know, I know, and this is something that I've even shared with my husband, that like now I know that even if something happens, my life is full because my kids know me. And that has been that, of how do I show up? How do I make my presence known? How do I manage the energy that I bring in the room? How do I let them know my very essence?
Brilliant. Awesome. So when I know I started this question, I don't know that I got an answer about it, but Before what were you doing for work before you got sick? Oh yeah, you tell me.
Yeah, education. Yeah, I
Yeah,
was I
education.
was I was still a consultant, but more focused for schools and families.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me
And
what you're doing
yeah,
now.
now now I'm focused more in helping organizations, nonprofits, social enterprises, small businesses that are focused on creating their online learning and online communities.
Hmm.
So I consider myself as a learning experience designer. So putting in that lens of how do you design learning experiences that meets the people that you're serving.
Okay.
Uh, and a big part of the work that I do is really human centered, to the point that I actually say no to Simon Sinek's start with why, because from the lens that I view things, it's start with who. Who are you serving? And from there, that's when you can say, okay, this is the reason why it's important.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mostly do consultancy work for nonprofits, um, and organizations that have more of a social impact, and focusing on the community side of things. I even actually use the term community alchemist as a title, because I believe in the transformational qualities of communities. And it's not just the face-to-face communities, but also online communities. How can you make it transformational? In During the time that I was sick, I co-founded She Dares along with one of my close friends. And She Dares has been that space for women to just talk about things that you often would not talk to someone else. And that for me has been one of that biggest leap in that sense of focusing more on organizations, because I realized that I draw so much of the energy from hearing how people respond to the learning spaces, the community spaces that were created either virtually or face to face. And that's not something that you can easily get when you're in the school, or giving workshops to parents. So for me, that was really a big shift from who I wanted to serve and who I'm serving now.
Hmm. So when you made that shift, what were some of the barriers you've encountered, like in the shift from what you were doing then to what you're doing now?
Ah, I would say the biggest one was the definition, because before it was so easy to say, "Oh, I'm an educational consultant," yeah, and that was that. Um, and now I realize that titles were not is not something that I'm too keen, in that sense of sharing with people. And that's also why I dabble with different projects, with different initiatives, because for me, I get my fullness of life from knowing that, hey, I've contributed to different impact, to different transformation. So that the biggest part was that, how do you put into words, the things that you can do. One of my clients, it was fascinating because we've had this 1 hour session, and she was just like, I've been trying to put into framework what I've been doing for the past 5 years, and we were just able to do that in an hour. And that's magic.
Yeah.
But
Think of
how
what
do you
that
put
freed
that
up
into
for her.
words?
Yeah.
Huh?
Think of what that freed up for her. Like, how beautiful.
Exactly. And that for me was that, of okay, not also being attached to that. If people ask, what do you do? With the question of that, I'll say, okay, these are the main buckets of what I do. But if you'd want to really experience what I can do, it's something else. And not, yeah, there's a sense of freedom, not knowing that there's no attachment to a result.
Yeah. That's why I love being a coach, because I don't have any attachment to any results. It's all about empowering and holding the other person able and capable of making change
Oh, yes, definitely.
and seeing the results that they are owning as their own, as opposed to being mine, is so brilliant. It's so liberating, and that's what I love about what I do now. So yeah.
Mm. Yeah,
So
this is that part that I realize with work, that I realize that it's not work in itself. It's life. When somebody say, "What is it that you do?" It's like it's part of my living. It's part of what what makes me alive.
mhm.
And
It's the
and then when
primary way I spend my time here.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and at the same time, you know, because I really got connected with, oh, this is what I'd want to do for myself, not for my kids, not for my husband, for myself.
Mhm.
And that for me was a big realization and a reality check of, okay, if this is what I want to do, how can I make it work?
Yeah. So how do you balance your fear of recurrence with your desire to live your best life?
I would okay, I would
Do you have
say
a fear of recurrence,
that
actually?
it comes, especially when you have, like, for my case, when I have the yearly checks.
Yeah.
That's the part that I was like, and just had it a couple of weeks ago. So
Mhm.
that's the I've learned now to, when I have my mammograms, to just really give myself as much space as possible, to drop everything off, and then to just have that free few days of just being with myself. um with regards to that fear, somehow I rationalize it in terms of, oh, everybody has something. they we all go through suffering, it's just that, yeah, for us, we have a name for suffering. and, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, that we don't get to suffer.
Mhm.
So for me, there was that, yeah, reassurance in knowing that, hey, things are how they are right now, and just to value that, value that now, value that moment. I do have some, techniques that I've learned, strategies that I employ, especially when I'm like, okay, now I'm just feeling anxious, feeling overwhelmed. So when things are getting to be heavy, I do use those tools for myself to say, okay, now breathing, meditation, time off, really taking care of myself. So those are some parts. And then, if when there are situations that I hear those, ooh, fears the most, I use the analogy of just sitting with it, just giving it a chair, and giving it that space to say, okay, so what are what is it that you're protecting me from? And oftentimes it leads me back to my kids, to my family, to the people that I love, to the mission that I like to do.
Mhm.
And then yeah, when I think about that, and I was like, oh yeah, but my kids know me, my husband knows me, I've been doing great work.
Yeah.
So
You
there's
are
that.
doing great work. You are doing great work. I feel like, going back to that, the 5 people you spend time with, right? And elevating your own self. I mean, I want to spend more time with you.
Thank you.
So if you could go back in time, so I know that you talked about the pivot being mostly for you, about your mindset, about your legacy and who you wanted to be in the world, and what you want to be known for, and what you want to do in your life, that your family, and friends and people around you are know you as you now. So if you could go back in time, what would one nugget of information that you wish you knew be? So this is the wish you know, and then there's going to be a piece of advice that you will pass on. So let's start with, what did you wish you knew before you were diagnosed?
What I wished I knew
Mm-hmm.
was not to keep my mom's story as my story.
Yes.
It was because when I got diagnosed and started, talking to it with people, I just heard, there was just, I think, 2 3 weeks in, that I just heard myself talking about my mom's story as mine.
Mm.
It was just like a big hammer of like, wait a minute, Lana, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So that for me was a big one. How I wish that all these years I didn't cling on to that fear unconsciously. Yeah, of how she lived her life, how cancer took her, and not have taken it as, my own ending as well.
Yeah. Okay. So if you were talking to another cancer survivor
Mm,
is feeling stuck or looking to pivot, what would it be, a piece of advice that you would give that person?
mm. Well, one of the things that I also learned to practice is to sit with the contraction, of finding the gifts that is in that stuck moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, for that lady to, to find that space of really just, hey, what is this stuck period for? What is it showing me? What is it teaching me? What is it surfacing for me? Because I see it as, in the times that I've had those big aha moments are the times when I just sat with a contraction and allowed for that contraction to show me some answers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not easy, sitting with, feeling, oh, I just want to get out of this, out of this funk. And I think a big part of that um became easier when I realized that there is a new normal,
Mm-hmm.
and not being stuck with that thought of, oh, the old, this is me, this is the old me.
Yeah.
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 So
And not
that,
clinging to that as being what you have to be now.
exactly.
Mm-hmm. That was a
Yeah.
big, one of my pivot moments was, my husband, who I still love very dearly, awesome, but he was so adamant that things go back to normal, to go, and
Oh.
that was the words that he was using regularly, like, oh, I really, I can't wait for you to go back to work so that when you're back to normal and everything can go back to the way it was. And I'm like, but that's where I got sick.
Yeah.
Like that's not what I want for me. This is, I have the opportunity now to create a new chapter, a new version, a new step, like, and a new me, and not go backwards. And it was a great conversation, actually a total flippant conversation with somebody that I didn't even know. I was at a seminar, and it was one of those turn to your person next to you kind of conversation. And I said, I remember saying, that I had this thing about going back, and she's like, well, that's probably because it was just a comment. It's probably because you're adding words, like backwards, to the thought. And I was like, God, and it was like yes, I feel like I'm going backwards and I want to go forwards. And so looking at going forwards into the next section of my life, and the next iteration of me, the next version, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've experienced it for yourself as well, but for me, after treatment was the most difficult.
Totally.
That was when all the support systems are done. I've even had this conversation with my own oncologist and say, okay, so what now? And she just blatantly said, "Oh, you go back to how things were." And I was just like, you can't say that. There's no going back. There. Okay, it is still a choice, of doing the same things, but that, like what you said, that put me in this situation, that got me in this situation.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I was loving, I was loving the boundaries. I was loving the people that I'm with. I was loving the emphasis on social work that I was doing. So I'm like, no, going back was not an option.
Yeah.
But I, what for me, what took a while was understanding, of how do I, share all this with my husband,
Mhm.
because that was the most difficult for me, of uh even though we have the relationship where I can share things with him. Yeah, he's like what you said, he's used to the old me. We've been married for 13 years. So he's used to that, for most of our relationship.
Mhm.
Used to not having me share, oh, wait a minute, this goes beyond my boundaries, or this is there's even a time when I told him, honey, right now, I don't have the space or the energy to provide you with the emotional support that you need.
Uh-huh.
And it was that, I was like, ooh, then I can say that. But then, yeah, how to make him understand, where it is coming from.
Yeah.
So that has been a struggle.
Yeah. I understand that. I like to say my husband is my mossy boulder. He's very, very stuck. Not stuck. Stuck's not the right word, but he's very stable. Like
Yeah,
he's very grounded.
a rock.
And
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
my rock, but he also doesn't like change much. So he doesn't change. So there's a little bit of moss growing on this rock, and I'm like the balloon that string is underneath him, and he's holding me down. And I'm like, hey, yeah, yeah, like, and that's, but I would fly off without my rock, you know, and I say to him every now and then, I'm like, I just really appreciate that your patience with me and my ups and downs and how I go and my learning, because I'm on an up and down journey, but it's going up, right?
Yes.
And it's not,
And it's going quick.
and I don't go down. I bounce a lot faster than I did when I used before that I used to. I used to be like, whoa, right? And now it's like, super, and bouncing back up. But having him, he has his own experience of what this cancer thing was, and it's his context now. Is my experience has started to form his context around cancer. And like you said, I mean, it's tough because I don't know. I have my experience and I know what I've grown out of it. He has his own experience
Yes.
and he has his own context around it. And it'll take him having his own experience or another experience, or maybe never.
Yeah.
Like, you never know. But he
Yeah.
will always have that. And so will my kids. They'll always have that.
Yes.
Carrying my story as his. Like when you said about your mom, like that your mom's story is not yours, right? Like everybody's is different. I lost my dad to cancer, right? And
Mhm.
I went through that process with my stepmother, where I was like, well, radiation, I did radiation. He should be able to do, and I totally put my context all over her. And then we
Mm.
lost him. And I questioned every piece of cancer advice that I could have given because
Mm.
my experience, not her, not his, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And that's another tough piece because people come and intentions are always good, most of the time. They're good and they're giving you advice, and it's like, I know you're trying to give me I understand the intention, but this is my experience.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Uh,
I got
I,
to the point where even saying to people, I'm like, thanks for your story, but do they die? because if they die at the end of this
Yeah.
conversation,
Just don't say it. Oh gosh. Oh, I have that. I'm like, seriously, people, can you not get into these conversations of, oh, my aunt, uh,
yeah, absolutely. So, as now I derailed there a little bit. I'm sorry. So tell me, just recap for me. You do have a lot going on. So recap for me different things that you have going on that I can then share to the people around me.
Yeah. So, yeah, for those who are thinking of creating their online learning and online communities, do check out dreamsedu.org. So this is mostly for, like I said, nonprofits, organizations that have quite a lot of progress already when it comes to the work that they're doing, and would like to scale it to the next level by adding more of a hybrid space where they can do things online and offline.
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically what Dreams Edu allows for. Um, and I'm also part of different organizations. So here in the Netherlands, I'm part of Neurodiversity Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to shift the way the education field see what neurodiversity is about, and having that voice in, yeah, sharing that we are all differently wired. Uh, and I'm also part of the team for Shift Foundation, wherein we provide workshops and activities for edge builder, bridge builders or edge workers, those who are more in the field of systemic change, and how can we shift our understanding of the world towards a more evolving and more life sustaining environment. And yeah, I do have certain projects that I do with different organizations. And I would say the red thread with all of this is I firmly believe in the power of what we can do as communities, as individuals, and how we can rally it towards a more transformational goal or mission. And for me, the best part is helping people make that visible, make their own theories of change be visible. How do we go about doing those transformation? How do we show our presence, keep our focus, and say that, okay, if this is the mission, how do we get there?
Yeah. Awesome. So in all those links, I'll put those in the show notes. So
Yes.
tell me
Thank you.
about She Dares.
Yes, so She Dares was an initiative that me and my friend Natalie started about 5 years now,
Mm-hmm.
since I got sick. And right now it's a Facebook community. So for those who would be interested to join in the conversations wherein we talk about issues like menopause, sex, things that you wouldn't even be saying, or talking with your other girlfriends. It's a space for us. It has always been that sacred space where women can share conversations with what it is that's alive in them. And oftentimes it's the taboos, that we don't normally say out loud. And we also offer face-to-face activities, like for this for International Women's Day, we're celebrating with women's brunch. So it's a fundraiser for in celebration of the theme each for equal. And we also have red dinners, wherein we invite our members to join us for a potluck dinner, wearing red, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And we do have connecting activities, and leave the room feeling so energized, that you have your tribe of women around you.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, this has been really, really great. I'm so glad that you have reached out to me, and that you answered the call when I said, "Hey, does anybody want to come and speak on my podcast?" I'm so excited to get to know you a little bit better, even now that we've had this conversation. And I'm just so thankful for, all of these experiences that we can share from far across the world, like totally different side of the world. But yeah, I love the idea of the red thread and how, that ties it all together. So thank you, Lana.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, and yeah, having this space and platform for us to share our stories. I find it as yeah, a big opportunity to just be able to hear and listen and share wisdom. That's the part that I guess living outside of my own tribe, my own people, in that sense, that has been something that I've craved for, to have those moments where I can just share with my group of women, group of with my own tribe. And yeah, having podcasts like yours is that space where yeah, we can all gather listening and yeah, basking in the stories that are shared. So thank you.
Thank you.